Hey everyone, and welcome to my first build video for the Elder Scrolls Online Update 46, Season of the Worm Cult. Today I'm going to show to you the base Dragonknight Subclassing build I've been running in PvP for the past few weeks. The goal of this build was just to make something that felt like it had some synergy between the skill lines and felt like a Dragonknight. We ended up going with Ardent Flame, Daedric Spear, and Storm Calling for a build with a focus on damage over time effects, but also has some decent burst damage to pair with the dot pressure, as well as high mobility, solid healing, which we'll talk about when we get into the skills and their passives. And overall, this build has been a ton of fun to play. It can feel squishy at times, plays a lot like a Stam Sork from people that have played the build after I've shown it to them have told me. But with damage being so high this patch, it's sort of expected. But if you play this build right, it can also feel very sustainable and tanky at times. Let's take a look at our superstar first. Here for our race, Mundus, and general stats, we're at Imperial on this build, as I think the skill cost reduction as well as max health and max stam go very well with this build. This is probably the stam heaviest build I've ever played, but also it has a lot of skills that cost magicka, both offensive and utility, so I think Imperial really shines here with the cost reduction. For attributes, we're running 7 magicka, 17 health, and 40 stamina. And just a little disclaimer here as you're listening to this and taking a look at the superstar, you don't have to follow the gear enchants and attributes exactly as I have them here. I use this guild on this gear on a lot of other builds, and I didn't want to change the enchants because I didn't want to affect those other builds. Main goal with the max stat enchants and attributes here is to hit 32k health, 22k stam, and have the rest be into magicka. However you can achieve it, go for it. We are a stage 3 vampire in this build. Damage is incredibly high this patch, and I find the 15% mitigation from Undeath to be very useful here, especially since we're not using resist defensive sets like Pariah or Trial by Fire. We run the Lover Mundus on this because I'm a big believer in penetration. Having a lot of pen helps us shred through players and secure kills easier with bigger hits. It's a Mundus change that I made last patch and noticed right away the difference in my damage. We run 18k pen on this setup with all of our pen buffs. Dropping Lover would drop you to a little bit over 15k, which is about as low as I'd go for pen in PvP. So if you don't want to run Lover on this, I'd recommend the Thief for more crit chance, Warrior for more weapon damage, or Serpent for more stam sustain if you feel like you need it. For the armor weights, we're running 3 heavy, 3 light, and 1 medium. Pen and crit chance are why we run 3 light armor in this build. We're not building into crit damage very heavily, and we need the crit chance for a skill that we'll be using, and sitting below just 30% is great for us on this build. The mag regen and cost reduction also helps out. But if you would like to run more medium pieces here for the stam cost reduction and regen, be my guest. I'd suggest changing 1 light piece to medium for an even 2-2 split, but even a 3 medium, 1 light could work here as well. If you did that though, I would recommend keeping the Lover Mundus up just to keep your pen up. Dropping below like 2 pieces of light armor, I believe would bring you below the 15k pen threshold, and I would not recommend playing underneath that personally. For food, we run the usual Jews of Misrule, and for potions, we run tripots as well as the movability pots and detect pots. Pretty standard for open world PvP there. Now, before we get into the gear sets, because I know you're wondering about the choices I made from looking at the Superstar, let's talk about the skill lines we chose. Our first skill line is Ardent Flame. Since we're a base DK, we had to keep 1 skill line from this class, and I chose to go with this one. I like the dot theme of it, and Whip just feels like Dragonknight to me, so I wanted to keep it. Overall, it's a pretty mid-tier skill line. It's got some solid abilities in it, which we'll talk about later when we get to the skill lines. Or I'm sorry, to the skill bar setups. And it's got some decent passives as well. Combustion did receive a pretty significant nerf, over 50%, but it still gives us a little bit of sustain. Warmth recently received a buff where it increases all damage over time effects by 6% after dealing direct damage with an Ardent Flame ability, which happens on every single cast of every single Ardent Flame ability we'll be using in this build. It's a pretty solid buff. It's essentially a Thaumaturge CP worth of damage that we just kind of got for free. So we take that. Searing Heat is an okay passive. It grants Searing Strike, Fiery Breath, and Dragonknight Standard a 25% damage buff and 4-second duration increase. World and Ruin is our last passive, and it increases our fire and poison damage by 5%. Not bad. Our next skill line is Daedric Spear. This is the skill line I really wanted to pair with Ardent Flame for the Burning Light changes, but before we get into that, let's take a look at the passives, since this skill line has some very strong ones. Piercing Spear gives us 12% increased critical damage and 12% increased damage to blocking targets with an Daedric ability slotted, which we do have on this build. While we don't build into critical damage a ton, having 12% more is nice, and the 12% extra damage to blocking targets really helps us keep our pressure up when people are on their back bars. Spear Wall gives us minor berserk and minor protection. And we use an Daedric Spear ability, which is great for our damage as well as survivability when we're doing offensive things on our front bar. Next is Burning Light. I'm going to spend a little bit more time on this one because this is the main passive I want to try and take advantage of. Burning Light received a buff where it no longer requires direct damage to build its stacks. Its stacks can now be built off of any damage. You need 4 stacks to proc it, and the stacks can build every half second. You might see where I'm going with this, but the reason we kept Ardent Flame and picked up Storm Calling is because all the instances of damage we can get through dots from Ardent Flame and Hurricane from Storm Calling. We can guarantee that damage is going off every second, building 2 stacks of Burning Light and proccing the effect every 2 seconds. It's basically an additional dot that also scales off of our weapon damage. Burning Light being magic damage also means we have a chance of proccing Overcharged and getting the minor magic is still debuff on targets, which helps out our mag sustain. The final passive here is a Balanced Warrior, which increases our weapon damage, spell damage, and armor by 6%. I think you might understand why this passive is good. Like the name, it's a pretty balanced passive. You get offense and defense from it. And for the last skill line, we are using Storm Calling. I took this one for a few reasons. It provides us with our major resolve buff as well as our major brutality buff, while also giving us mobility and a small bit of sustain and damage. Capacitor gives us 141 of each recovery. Energized increases our physical and shock damage by 5%. Amplitude increases our damage done against enemies by 1% for every 10% current health they have, so up to a 10% damage bonus against targets at 100% health. Expert Mage gives us 108 weapon and spell damage per Storm Calling ability slotted, and the extra damage is always nice. With the skill lines out of the way, let's go back to the Superstar here and talk about the gear and bar setups. Our first monster set is Bloodspawn. There's a lot of damage this patch, as I've said many times in this video and will continue to say, so you need to have some survivability built in. Bloodspawn does that for us while also offering Ultimate Generation. Pretty self-explanatory here. Our second set is our back bar defensive set, and we are running Daedric Trickery. Really good open world set here that gives us a ton of strong defensive buffs. Worth noting here is that how these buff sets work. We have Major Vitality and Major Expedition on this build through skills. If these buffs are active while you're on that back bar before Daedric Trickery procs, those buffs will not be eligible to be chosen. So in theory, we can keep a rotation of Major Protection, Major Mending, and Major Heroism. Also worth noting is that these buffs persist through the 5-piece being broken, meaning we can bar swap and keep these strong defensive buffs on us while we go offensive, which does go a long way in helping our survivability. Our damage set here is Burning Spellweave, the DK Classic. Since we're using Ardent Flame, we're going to be proccing this set on cooldown to give us a huge boost to our weapon damage. High weapon damage means higher tooltips for our damage, healing, and for the purpose of this build, a higher Burning Light tooltip. And to round out the gear sets, we're running one piece of Trainee for the extra health. We're running Reinforced on our chest piece for a bit of extra resists, and Impen on everything else for the critical damage resists. For weapons, we're running 2 maces for the pen, 1 Nirnhoned, 1 charged, with a shock enchant, and the other with an absorb stam enchant. For our jewelry, we're running 3 infused with 2 weapon damage and 1 stamina recovery. Our back bar weapon is an ice staff, and we are running the weapon damage enchant here. Next is our Mythic, and wanted to take a bit of time to explain the choice here. As you might see, we're not using the new Mythic, Monomyth Reforged, and Markin is a pretty mid-tier Mythic by most standards. The reason we run Markin here is that it's a consistent form of offense and defense. On the offensive end, we have set some passives that boost our weapon damage by quite a bit, and since this is a build that tries to push that weapon damage as high as it can to take advantage of Burning Light, as well as boosting raw damage and healing, rather than building into critical damage, Markin makes sense here over Monomyth for me. On the defensive end, damage is, yet again, like I've said, very high this patch. Builds are even using some protective jewelry with the new Mythic to try to give themselves a little bit more survivability. The added resists you get from Markin are just about worth 2 pieces of protective. 2 gold pieces of protective come out to 2,380 resists, and Markin gives us 2,314 with 3 pieces being worn. This allows me to run infused jewelry traits for more weapon damage and more sustain. Overall, I think Markin fits this build better, but if I had to use another Mythic on this setup, it would probably be Pale Order. If you were going to run Pale Order, you'd probably want to run that as like a protective trait over the infused here, just to recoup some of the resists you lose from swapping off Markin. If you wanted to use Monomyth on this build, you totally could, but I would suggest changing the gear entirely and running Order's Wrath and Rallying Cry while going through Protective to help your survivability on the front bar. The weapons would stay the same. You could run 2 maces. Next are skills. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but I'm going to highlight a few of the synergies between some of the skills we have. Front bar, we're running Burning Embers, Javelin, Noxious Breath, Molten Whip, Critical Surge, and Dawnbreaker. First things first here is Critical Surge plus Burning Embers is a ton of healing. This is the reason we're running the 3 light armor as well as, Burning Spell gives us a line of crit. We want to have as much crit chance as we can. These two combined, like I just said, are a lot of healing, combined with the other dots from things like Noxious Breath and Hurricane. We have a lot of instances of damage and a lot of opportunities to crit to keep this rolling every second. Binding Javelin is our main CC. It is an unblockable, hard CC, but it is dodgeable, so you need to be careful when using this as to not stam drain yourself. As you can see, it costs a lot of stam, and it is very easy to just spend all of your stam trying to stun somebody who's just dodge rolling. Be patient, try to time it after a roll dodge, and you'll be getting a lot out of this skill for sure. Noxious Breath is our AoE Major Breach skill. It's also poison damage and helps us proc the poison status effect, which is going to help proc combustion for us. Molten Whip is our spammable. Very obvious choice here since we're using Ardent Flame. Building up the Seething Fury stacks gives us an extra 300 weapon and spell damage, which goes nicely with this build. Dawnbreaker is our ultimate here. The reason we run Dawnbreaker is that it passively gives us an increase to our weapon and spell damage. It's also benefiting from some Storm Calling passes that increase physical damage. It's also an AoE. It also hits hard, and it's also a stun. It does quite a lot. This ability is very nice because, like I did just say with Binding Javelin, there are a lot of people who just roll dodge on instinct when they're taking a lot of damage. So this build, it can help you to just kind of stun people after you've dotted them up. You're waiting for a Binding Javelin. You don't want to throw it out. They roll, hit him with a Dawnbreaker. You can get a stun that way as well. If you didn't want to run Dawnbreaker, you can run Crescent Sweep. You will lose the passive weapon and spell damage, but Crescent Sweep is a pretty hard-hitting single-target ultimate in its own right with that pretty significant dot that it applies afterward. For our back bar, we're running Healing Soul, Race Against Time, Resolving Vigor, Flames of Oblivion, and Hurricane. And our back bar ultimate is Temporal Guard, which we'll explain in a moment. Healing Soul is our burst heal since none of the classical lines we picked have access to one. We are running the healing script, the Druid's Resurgence for Max Mag and Max Stam return to us to help offset the cost of this ability and also give us some Stam sustain. And we're running Major Vitality on this for the increased healing. Race Against Time is our snare removal and immunity that also gives us minor force. Pairs pretty nicely with the Daedric Spear passive that increases our critical damage by 12%. And it's also giving us Major Expedition, which when paired with Minor Expedition from Hurricane, gives us an incredible amount of mobility. Resolving Vigor is our heal over time, and our Minor Resolve buff, pretty self-explanatory. Flames of Oblivion, we have this on the back bar for a reason, but this gives us our Major Prophecy and Savagery buff, increasing our critical chances, as well as giving us access to an ability that is really strong when timed properly with our burst. Just gives us free damage every 5 seconds, and if you line that up with Blinding Javelin into a Molten Whip or a DB into a Molten Whip, your burst is just gonna hit even harder. It's a really, really solid skill. We use it on the back bar here because of the Stormcalling passives for the extra weapon and spell damage. We want Critical Surge here to give us that 108 on our front bar, and Hurricane here to give us 108 on our back bar. If you would prefer to have Flames of Oblivion on the front bar, you can do that. You lose a little bit of weapon damage on the front bar, but it's not a big deal because you'd gain a little bit more on your back bar for your healing. So I'll leave that choice up to you. Hurricane is our major resolve buff. It also a source of minor expedition. Like I said before, pairing major and minor expedition gives us a ton of ability. This skill in particular is very good to us because it is essentially an AoE major breach, or I'm sorry, AoE minor breach, and that is because this ability is physical damage. Physical damage has the chance to proc the Sundered status effect, which will add minor breach to the targets, and it also gives us an extra 100 weapon and spell damage. It also, for an armor buff, this ability does an insane amount of damage. It's very, very good. Could not see using Boundless Storm on this build. It has to be Hurricane. Okay, so last, but certainly not least, is our champion points. We'll start with blue. We've got Deadly Aim, Resilience, Duelist Rebuff, and Focus Mending. We are running 3 defensive, 1 offensive for open world this patch. As I've been saying, there's a lot of damage, and you also have a lot of damage built into this build through your sets and passives, so you can get away with running 1 offensive CP. That offensive CP is Deadly Aim. This CP double dips. As it says, it increases damage done with your single target attacks by 3%. That means direct single target and damage over time single target. Any damage over time that stickies itself onto a player is considered single target damage. So in our case here, Burning Embers and Noxious Breath, the dots from those abilities are considered single target, so they also receive the buff. That goes for Dawnbreaker's dot as well. Resilience, you absolutely need here. Critical damage is very, 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 very high this patch, so you need as much crit resist as you can get. And since we are not running Rallying Cry on this build, we absolutely need Resilience. I believe this 660 works out to be about 10% reduction to critical damage, so you cannot get away with not using this patch. We're running Duelist Rebuff, similar to Deadly Aim. This works the same way. It reduces damage taken by single target attacks by 6%. Any dots that apply themselves, that sticky themselves onto you, that is considered a single target attack, so this also benefits us against dot setups as well. Focus Mending is our flex spot here, gives us an extra 10% healing, which can be really nice paired with Major Vitality from our Burst Heal, as well as Major Mending from our back bar set Daedric Trickery. With that in mind, you already do have 2 strong healing debuffs from those sources just mentioned, so if you wanted to take this off, you absolutely could. And if you were to do that, I would suggest running a 3rd defensive in Ironclad, or if you want more offense, I would suggest running Master at Arms or Untamed Aggression. Probably Master at Arms before Untamed Aggression if I had to pick, but it's up to you. For our red CP, we've got the usual suspects here. We've got Sustained by Suffering, Pain's Refuge, Survival Instincts, and then Rejuvenation is our flex spot. I'm running Rejuvenation for the extra sustain, but if you feel like your sustain is good and you don't need this passive, you can absolutely run Juggernaut here. The 5% damage mitigation helps a lot during CC immunity. What I've also tried running on here is On Guard. One of the things I noticed right away about this build is that it lacks the extra 10% block mitigation that a lot of builds and skill lines can give you. This gives you that back during CC immunity, which can be very helpful when you're getting grouped down, stunned, break free. You got a whole block to hit some heals, rebuff some abilities. So you could definitely consider using On Guard as well. And that's it for the build, guys. If you stuck it out this long, thank you very much. There's a lot of information and a lot of things I wanted to touch on, so the video did end up running pretty long. If you decide to try this build, I hope you enjoyed as much as I have. And I'm also streaming on Twitch now, so if you want to drop by and let me know how the build's going for you or what you think of it, or you just want to come by, say hello, and chat some ESO PvP with us, you can find me at twitch.tv/KieranBlaze, which I will leave in the description for this video. Thank you so much, guys, and see you next time.